Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today I want to talk about how to pivot into technology consulting as an experienced hire. And this is a question I get all the time from a lot of people on LinkedIn or Instagram, and I kind of want to put them all in one video here just kind of as a starting point. First off, I want to start off and say that you don't really need to do that much effort in terms of actually trying to get skills out there. I think if anything, actually a lot of what you currently have is good. It's just a matter of how to pivot that into the skill set that you need for consulting. So make sure to check out my video over here. That one is going to tell you a little about how to tailor a resume specifically to technology consulting. I used a real listing from Accenture and then try to tailor my fake, but it's also still real. It's like I kind of like made it more cat themed. That resume will be the perfect way to see how to tailor into it. So really, it's really just like, how do you bring out the story behind it? You want to say like you have all the soft skills and the technical skills, but like as I start with technical skills, I think like a big misconception is that a lot of people, I don't know how to code, I don't know how to do data analytics, I don't know how to do this, but like just look into what you already have. Most chances you have something related to technical skills. So whether it be Excel or PowerPoint, another one could be analysis, like maybe you didn't work with data analytics or like programming or whatever, but you did probably work with Excel sheet and numbers, and that technically is a technical skill. Another one's problem solving. It's not technical, but it is enough to consider a hard skill. So you want to really show that you're a good problem solver. Show it in your resume by like, oh, you solved this problem, this is the result. So use the STAR method. A lot of people are like, oh, STAR, isn't that for the interview? No, you should also want to do it in your resume, and it makes it a little bit clearer as to like what is the situation. I also kind of like to use like something called PAR method instead. It's a little bit easier to understand because sometimes for me and for other people it's a little bit hard to tell the difference between situation and task. So PAR method is just problem, action, and result. So with that, like, how did you even solve that problem? And you want to focus on how you solve that problem. You don't want to talk about like maybe how your team did it. You want to talk about how you yourself has done it. So it actually kind of leads you up in terms of like how to actually prepare for an interview too, because if you have that prepared in the resume, it's pretty easy to just kind of bring that story to life when it comes to the interview. So it's actually kind of like a double whammy, like you do everything, two birds with one stone to help you out with that case. So I think like on the technical skills, I think though, like depending on what you're thinking, depending on your level, if you're like still towards the beginning of your career, like maybe you're 1 to 2 years or 3 years after you just graduated or after your first job, you still kind of have some chance to kind of go a little bit lower and then kind of pivot to elsewhere. So for example, maybe you were in a role where you're doing financial analysis, you work with Excel, you work with numbers, accounting maybe, and then that specifically you can use to kind of pivot over to say you know how to do analysis. So now all you have to do is just kind of pivot. So let's say for example you want to go into UX. It's kind of a different area to pivot into, so that's where it's a little bit fuzzy, but you want to kind of think about like how much is it to actually move and pivot? Is it going to be easy? Like if it's financial analysis compared to data analytics, like actually it's pretty close, but if it's like financial analysis to UX design, then it's going to be pretty different because it's a different skill set or different kind of vision or lens that you need for this role. So you kind of need to talk to people, and I think this is what the next one would be, is networking. You want to talk to people in all these firms that you're interested in, talk about what they do like in terms of these particular fields. If you have anything out there that's interesting to you, then look at specifically those roles. If you don't, just like go reach out to a bunch of random people on LinkedIn or in the Technology Consulting Community Facebook group, link down below. It is a community right now with 2,700 people from around the world, over 70 countries, that are aspiring or current technology consultants. So that's a really good community that you can just like post your question or post your discussion topic and then have everyone else like actually comment back on it and give their feedback. So let's say, for example, you're going from financial analysis to UX. Now you're like, okay, I'm gonna go talk to someone, I'm gonna go network with someone who's in UX design at Deloitte. So now you go reach out to them on LinkedIn or in technology consulting community or like through connections of other people or your school or alma mater and alumni. And then now from there, you talk to them and say like, hey, so what are some technical skills you need? And most likely there are some that are kind of transferable. So, and when I say by transferable, I mean like it's not completely the one that you use, but it helps you at least learn how to get to that point. So for example, like financial analysis is somewhat close to data analytics. Data analytics is about like asking questions and then figuring out how to using the data to actually answer that. UX design, maybe you can use a survey. It's somewhat transferable where you use survey data to help answer UX design questions. So a little bit different, not too much though. So it's a little bit easier to kind of like bring that story in, and now it's just a matter of putting everything together. So now you can mention like through your project in financial analysis, and you want to pick out specifically the experiences that have actually highlighted what is important in UX design. So you also need to know a little bit more of like not just the actual job itself of UX design, but you also want to know a little bit more of like what's the nature of it. So and that way, like when you do your interview or you do your cover letter or anything like that, you can say that like these are what I've done before at this company doing this role, but it is transferable to UX design because I've done this, and it is easy to kind of pivot and move it. Maybe not that easy, but at least to the recruiter, it'll show like, okay, yeah, I guess you have something then. It may not be exactly what UX design is, but now you can kind of go forth and say like, okay, maybe the financial analysis, you did work with clients. So now you just have to say with UX design, it's really just like interacting with the user and really getting that user feedback and working with that, right? So now you have to talk to them, and now it's just like pretty similar too. So do you see what I'm saying? It's like pretty transferable. It's just a matter of the story you tell. It is not lying in any case. You just have to kind of say it in the context of like your resume description or your job description of the resume section for that role, and then it will kind of transferable too. So that way the AI behind the application system, you'll actually see that like, okay, the keywords are pretty similar. You have the skills that they're talking about, even the length, because of financial analysis 3 years and looking for 3 years of experience with this, then you pretty much have it. It's just a matter of actually working together to see like how to bridge the differences together. So now after that, I think it's really dependent on actually doing the interview. So whether or not you have client-facing skills, I think a lot of people, they just need to kind of think deeper. So for me, I worked retail at Staples like in high school for 2-3 years. It's actually a pretty easy role to kind of lift and move over into consulting because you're working with clients, difficult, easy, and all of these kind of like weird bureaucracy you have to deal with. So think about it like maybe you worked at a restaurant, maybe you worked with something clients, maybe you worked as like an events coordinator at a hotel, and then you worked with clients to actually organize their events. How was that experience? Like think about things with scope, time, and money. So with that said, like now you're gonna know like, okay, like how are you like close to deadlines? How are you like when there's like a lack of budget? Or how are you like when there's scope creep? Like think about those kind of things when it comes to that situation. It may not be exactly the same, but just all you have to do is just pivot, you know? So in your resume and your interview, you just have to kind of think about that and then go for it. So a lot of times the client-facing skills too is also like in general working with difficult clients. So it could be as simple as like, how is it like working with a difficult parent? So I like to use this example that like, let's say for example, they ask you, tell me about a time you worked with a difficult client, and maybe you haven't had any client experience, but you could say instead that like, oh, unfortunately I have not had any client experience, but I have been able to work with difficult people. It is the same thing. It's not really just difficult client. The only difference is that maybe clients does have a little bit more pull because they have like some say with the money. So just choose a similar situation like that. So for me, it could be like, oh, I'm trying to convince my parents to allow me to have a rabbit or something like that. And then I would have a presentation. Like I literally had a presentation. So for that is really just like, okay, what is the reason why I want a rabbit? And this is where like you have to kind of work with them and compromise. I think it's pretty similar there. Like maybe the actual skill set's a little bit different in terms of maybe like, here's a presentation. I'm going to show you graphs. You're not going to probably show graphs for that unless you are kind of hardcore that way, then go for it. But something like that, people really, okay, how do we work between yours and how do we work between mine? It's the same kind of situation where you want to compromise, make sure both people are satisfied. And then how did you go about it? Was it really just like head on bringing all your facts, or bringing in like actual testimonies, or bringing in like other solutions and alternatives? Like really, that's just kind of similar to how you would do it in a client situation. It's slightly different, but if you don't know the answer to it, it's better to answer it with a real situation that isn't a lie, that you're not going to just pull one out and say, yeah, I worked with a client, but it really wasn't. But you can be completely honest and really just use that transferable skill or transferable experience. So now do you guys get what I'm talking about? I don't think it's that hard to kind of pivot in as an experienced hire. I think though, like the part that is a little bit harder though is if you're like 3+ years into the industry. So let's say, for example, you're 20 years into the industry, you worked with HR, and now you want to go into finance. You've been 20 years into the industry for HR. Why are you moving to finance? That is going to be a big question. And how are you going to even change all of the mindset that you had from HR? You're going to be thinking about like, okay, well, I know how HR works, but then now how are you going to immediately pivot to finance? And a lot of times you'll get a little bit biased that way too, from ageism as well. That does happen sometimes. So you're going to be like probably perceived as people who don't actually pivot as well. Like you're not really going to be a quick learner. You're going to be set in your ways. You've like done this for 20, 30 years. We always hear that all the time. So how are you going to do it that way? That one is mostly going to be networking. You want to make sure people know you as a character, as a person. That you want people to know you from your character, from your work ethic, from how you work. And so like, for example, in HR, maybe like COVID hit your company. How did you pivot? So it's a pretty similar thing is like in consulting. How would you pivot? It's like, and I'm not saying pivot in terms of like how to change your jobs. I'm talking about moving fast and thinking fast on your feet. So you just have to kind of use that similarity in there, your professionalism, focus on that. And then I can't really give you that much advice on this because specifically for me, I'm like 3 years into the industry and I don't think I have enough experience or knowledge on how like someone who's 30, 40 years into the industry pivot into consulting. But a lot of it is really just gonna be networking, and you're gonna have to do a lot of work as well because you're kind of like pigeonholing yourself in whatever field you were coming from. It's a little bit easier though if you were jumping from place to place and you didn't really specialize in anything. It's also a little bit easier if you're okay with settling with a little bit lower role that's not specialized, because as you go higher in the firm, you'll get a little bit more specialized and also a little bit more focused on a particular area. But if you didn't really focus on a particular area, like you'll probably be on the entry level or a lower level, and that way you'll be like kind of on the same page as everyone who hasn't really specialized or pigeonholed themselves. So that's something to take into consideration. I think like most people who have been reaching out to me are like only 3 to 5 years, so it's like still workable. But if you're like 20 years in the industry and you want to go into technology consulting, that's where it's a little bit tricky, and I honestly can't really speak much for that. So definitely check out the technology consulting community because we do have a lot of seasoned, experienced hires over there that really can tell you about how they actually pivot through. But sometimes a master's degree can actually help a lot. Master's degree could be like in tech or in MBA, and some places don't even have a preference. Sometimes they just say like, okay, we want you to do this, and then from that, like, you just have to kind of fall under that criteria of the job description. So what do you guys think about this? Like, I think like as a starting point, this is a good point. Like, it's really just make your story, put in the resume, put in your interview, and then how to pivot is the hardest part, because a lot of people like are very set in their mind. They're like, oh, I'm like in tech. How do I get into management consulting? Or vice versa, how I'm in business. How do I get into tech? How do I show that? And it really is like how to bring your story into life. And all these little tips I said about like maybe these transferable experiences or transferable skills, you have them, you just kind of need to make them come to life. So for example, like I mentioned about storytelling, like, okay, well, storytelling is a pretty hard skill to learn, but like you probably have it already. So whenever you talk to your friends about like, oh my God, do you know what happened last night? You're already storytelling, just like starting and then giving that conversation, you're engaging with them. So really it's just a matter of like, okay, let's say for example, public speaking, we always talk about storytelling, we talk about being personable and interactive. I like to do a story as if they're like, I don't know, my friend, and then I'm trying to talk to them as if it's like a Friday night. So that's how I would start out. I'll be a little bit more professional because like it is for a client call or work, or maybe to a managing director or partner or whatever, but it's pretty similar principles in terms of how you would want to organize it. Like you want to have like a little climax, and then you want to have a result. So from that, like think about how would you do it. So let me know down below like what you think about this. Like I think a lot of questions are going to be answered today, but at the same time, definitely check out my playlist over here. A lot of it is going to answer like exactly what you want in terms of how to succeed. So maybe you're trying to get into the job, or maybe you're just trying to actually like get the job, and then now what do you do now, like how to succeed. I have a whole playlist on that as well, so definitely check that out. So thank you guys so much, and see you guys next time. Bye.